I'm going to hit live in a couple of seconds, and then we're going to give people some time to come into the webinar. 3, 2, 1, go live.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We'll wait another moment as people continue to join before we begin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're going to give it just another moment for people to continue to join, and then we'll begin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will begin shortly. We want to thank everyone who shared questions ahead of the webinar, and you can also submit questions live during today's event using the question and answer function, which should be in the bottom controls of your menu on Zoom. We may not be able to get to all of the questions today, but we will work to get to as many as we can. And with that, I will turn it over to John McLean to begin.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm John McLean. It's been a privilege to serve as the 2019-20 chair of the Faculty Senate. And I also serve as the Stevenson Professor and chair of the Department of Chemistry. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation with incoming Chancellor Daniel Diermeier. During this event, we'll discuss some of the serious issues that are at the forefront of our minds as faculty members and as individuals. And our incoming Chancellor, Daniel Diermeier, will address topics that are at the top of the priority list for all of you. Daniel will officially join Vanderbilt on July 1st as our 9th Chancellor. By way of background, he most recently served as the Provost of the University of Chicago, where he was also the David Lee Schilling Law Distinguished Service Professor at the Harris School of Public Policy. Before joining the University of Chicago, he taught at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University and the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Rochester and master's degrees from the University of Munich, the University of Southern California, and the University of Rochester. He is a fellow of the AAAS, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Canadian Institute of Advanced Research. Throughout his career, he has proven his ability and commitment to work across disciplines and institutions, which aligns with the approach many of you have taken in cross-disciplinary and trans-institutional collaboration. I encourage you to read Daniel's full biography, which is available on the Chancellor Transition website at vanderbiltuniversity.edu/chancellor-transition. With that, I will turn it over to Katherine McCammon, who will be the 2020-2021 Faculty Senate Chair, and she is an Associate Professor of Teaching and Learning. Katherine?
Thank you, John, for that introduction. I'm happy to see so many colleagues joining us today. As an early plug, I hope to see many of you at our Faculty Senate meetings when they commence again this fall. This morning, we'll have a few questions that I'll ask to Daniel, and then we'll move on to the questions that were submitted previously by faculty and finish with any questions that you might raise during the live chat today. If you do want to ask a question during the live chat, you can use the question and answer function. You should see that down at the bottom of your screen. Division of Communications is going to help us this morning to gather the questions here on Zoom. And I anticipate with only an hour of time for everybody that we won't be able to get to every question, but we will be collecting them all as we come in and providing some answers for those later on. With that, let's begin the conversation. Daniel, I wanted to first welcome you almost fully to Nashville, 100% of the time, and give you a chance to say a few words before we start.
Well, thank you, Katherine and John. Thanks for joining me today, and thank you all for finding the time to be part of this discussion. So I'm excited and look forward to joining Vanderbilt officially on July 1st. As you may have guessed, my transition didn't exactly go as planned. So I had every thought this would be a nice gradual process, but then of course everything changed in March. And ironically, that has given me the opportunity to be much more involved with the university. I've been talking to faculty. I've started really kind of ongoing conversation with the chairs, with the deans, the vice chancellor. And then of course, all the issues that we had to deal with, I was at least became a growing part of these efforts, over the weeks. These are difficult times. We all know that. But I think it's important to just recognize how challenging they are for the university and how challenging they have been for you in the roles that you play as faculty member at Vanderbilt. We all saw the horrific video of the killing of George Floyd, and we've heard about and got reports about the other senseless killings. We have done a lot at Vanderbilt in the area of diversity, inclusion, equity, but we all have to ask ourselves, how do we do more? How do we step up and do more in combating racism and social injustice? We have taken steps already on that. Many of you know that we've appointed Andrew Churchwell in his role as Vice Chancellor, and William Robinson in the role of Vice Provost. But this is a process that we have to engage with. I'll say a little bit more about that as we continue the discussion, but it's obviously a top priority for us here at Vanderbilt, and I look forward to doing this together with the faculty. And all of this, of course, in the context of COVID-19, which arguably is the biggest crisis that universities have faced since the Civil War. An unprecedented challenge at every aspect of what we do. Vanderbilt, throughout its history, has been committed to residential education. And literally within a couple of days, every one of you had to switch to an online format. This was difficult, this was challenging. We've asked you to do more than we usually would in these extraordinary times, and you have stepped up. And I'm extremely grateful for all the effort that was put into that under extremely difficult and challenging circumstances. I look back at where we are on that, the planning that has happened, the work that has gone into this, both in terms of how do we dealt with the COVID-19 crisis as it emerged, and now more recently also about how do we think about the fall and bringing back students to campus in the fall semester, reopening the research activities and so forth. The team under the leadership of Interim Chancellor and Provost Susan Venti has done an amazing, remarkable job. We have decided to work through the details before we make any announcements, but we're ready now, and we feel that we're at a point where we can tell the community, the faculty, the students, their families, the staff, what the plans are. I do want to point out, to state the obvious, is that these are plans, and that we are in a period of persistent and profound uncertainty. Things will change. If you just pick up the newspaper every day, new understanding of how the virus works and operates, and how the dynamics of the disease are evolving. And then, of course, there's the whole political, social environment that also is changing. So it will require all of us to do this jointly in the spirit of like one community to deal with these challenges. I couldn't be happier on where we are, but I do understand that this puts an enormous amount of demands on US faculty members, and I'm very grateful for that.
Daniel, I'm comforted to hear you lead with some address to what's happening on the national landscape. And a number of faculty have asked about our local response to some of the racial tensions that you've mentioned. Can you speak to specific actions that you're hoping the university is going to address as we're moving forward? It's come up from a number of us.
Yes, I think they are. This obviously is top of mind for every one of us, and we have been engaged in a variety of conversations, listening sessions. I have done some of them. Provost has done some of them. The leadership has done a bunch of them. And this is ongoing. And I would say we need to look at this from 2 points of view. The first point of view is the Vanderbilt community. Are we doing what we can do in order to be an inclusive community? And I think it's really important to go back to what the purpose of a university is. What are the fundamental assumptions that we bring to this? And at least the way I think about it is it's based on a fundamental belief. It's a fundamental belief in human potential. And the way we do this is we do it through research, we do it through teaching, we do it in artistic and athletic endeavors, but it's fundamentally about bringing students to campus, bringing faculty to campus, putting them in an environment where they can thrive, whether that's through a transformative education or through path breaking and field defining research. That's fundamentally, I think, is what universities are based on. That means is that we want to make sure that we bring to the university diverse perspectives, that everyone who can benefit from a Vanderbilt education has a chance to do that. We've done this to Opportunity Vanderbilt, but I know from many years of working on this problem is that the financial barriers to access to a great education are only parts of that. And we need to work hard to understand what are the other barriers of that, and how do we make sure that everyone who can benefit and can thrive in a Vanderbilt environment is then able to do that to the fullest extent possible. And the same is true on the faculty side. We want to have a diverse faculty body. We want to bring different perspectives, backgrounds on that. We want to have a diversity of diversity where different perspectives, different backgrounds can thrive. But we have to make sure that we bring faculty from diverse backgrounds to university, and that they're in an environment where they can thrive. We will look at that in detail. These are complicated and complex decisions, and this is not just some kind of empty phrase. I've experienced this repeatedly in my work at the University of Chicago when we are hard at work at diversifying the student body and bringing in a more diverse group of faculty to the university. But bringing them in and providing financial support to the students is only one step. It's a crucially important step, but it's the first one. So we will look at that. We will see on where we are, what the obstacles are, and how we can do better. The second piece, I think, which is just as important, it has to do with our relationship to the community. Many of you know about the health disparities that are just being highlighted and being put front and center to COVID-19. I live in Hyde Park on the south side of Chicago. The rates of the death rates from COVID-19 in Chicago between the African American and the white community are 6 to 1. African Americans die at a rate of 6 to 1 compared to white Chicagoans, and it's a stark and horrific expression of the health disparities and health inequities that we see brought front and center by this disease. So what is it that universities can do in order to address that? Well, there's on the one hand, there's of course the medical sciences and the biomedical breakthrough broadly construed that also includes issues of community health and so forth. And at Vanderbilt, we have done great work on that. The partnership with the medical center has been tremendous. The medical school, the basic science faculty, the people in engineering, everybody has been involved with making a difference and has succeeded in doing that. Just want to highlight one example, Mark Dennison's work, of course, which was, did the foundational work for remdesivir, which is the only known effective treatment for COVID-19 right now. That work was done right here, and it's a testament to our commitment to that. But what the last 2 weeks have shown is that we need to go beyond the core activities that we usually engaged in, teaching and research, and ask ourselves, how do we, as an important member of the national community, can have a positive impact? How do we engage with the community in a more intentional way? And of course, there's a lot of activities that are going on already. Faculty are doing that, student groups are doing that. But I'd like us to challenge ourselves whether we can do more, and whether we can utilize the fact that Vanderbilt is one of the most important institutions in Nashville and the community to have a more positive impact on the community, to create opportunity and reduce the inequities that are so stark right now and have been highlighted so prominently over the last few weeks.
Thank you. I'm going to circle back to some of the points that you've raised a little bit later, and maybe dive a little bit more deeply into specifics here on the university.
Sure.
But before we get there, let's take a step backwards as we look ahead to your time as Chancellor at Vanderbilt. A number of us have already done the background searching to find out your professional background, but I think there's some general curiosity about what led you here. Can you tell us, what don't the web pages tell us about what led you to a career in higher ed?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and here's a little bit of my story in a nutshell. So as you can tell from my accent, I was not born in this country. I'm not from the South. I was born in Berlin, the divided city. I was born on the West Side, so that allowed my family and myself to travel as well. But it was a profound experience to see how politics and the greater kind of political environment can really have a profound impact on the life of people. So crossing a border meant you have to go through twice, first out of Berlin, then you drive through what was it, East Germany at the time, the GDR, and then re-enter. And every time you would be confronted with hostile border guards with machine guns, barking dogs that would take your car apart to see whether there are any refugees were hiding in there, people that tried to flee each other. It was a profound experience growing up in that context. And so that stuck with me. And I think it was a theme that then it took many more years to come to fruition. I'm a first generation student. I'm the first of my family to go to university. I'm the first to graduate from high school. And so I can empathize with some of the challenges that our first generation students have. It doesn't mean, I still had, I had enough to eat. I had a roof over my head. It wasn't, I didn't experience all the challenges that some of our first generation students, but I know what it's like to have no context at all when you go into a university context. I was fortunate enough to have mentors, people that believed in me. In high school already, I got interested in philosophy originally when I was 15 or 16 because of a teacher who just set up a discussion group with 5 or 6 of us, fell in love with that, wanted to be a philosophy professor, to the great horror of my parents, who couldn't quite know A, what that was, and B, how we're ever gonna make a living on that. But I prevailed. I was lucky enough to get a fellowship from the German government for gifted students. So I was able to study and studied philosophy. And then I had originally, good old German classical philosophy, Heidegger, Kant, Hegel, and all of that. And I had a conversion experience when I was 20, fell in love with Wittgenstein, did a whole pilgrimage to Austria, hitchhiked there, looked where he grew up, founded a museum, where, the cat that he had prepared. It was a fantastic experience. And then I got the opportunity to study abroad. And originally, I was hoping to study philosophy at Oxford. There was a whole debate on whether I missed the deadline or not. I think I was right. They think they were right. At any rate, Oxford didn't work out. And I got the opportunity to go to the University of Southern California. Never been to the United States, never been to an English-speaking country. And I literally arrived at LAX airport with 2 suitcases and $1,000. Got lost on the freeway right away, had a fantastic time, loved every minute of it. Loved being in the United States, loved being in California, loved being at USC, but decided that philosophy was not for me. And so I've been in the doctorate program. They accepted me in the doctorate program, but after a year I said, this is not for me. I don't have the temperament for it. Finished with a master, went back to Germany, and exactly when the wall came down. So I was in Berlin when the Brandenburg Gate opened. I remember the fireworks. I saw then President George Bush, François Mitterrand, the President of France, Chancellor Kohl. I climbed up the wall, tore my jacket, had champagne. There was Beethoven's Ninth was playing. It was incredible. And the same border guards that were so mean, even a few days before, they would welcome you with open arms. And the next day. And it showed me the importance of political institutions and structure on that. Long story short, I got interested then in political science. A technical version of political science, was basically an applied game theorist. Got my PhD at the University of Rochester. Then went to Stanford in the business school. Again, total coincidence. They had a great research group there. But I had an interest in that, in the research, and then really liked working with professional students. Was recruited by the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern to build their program in kind of political economy at the time. Did that, got very interested in crisis management, an interest that comes in handy these days, and started getting interested in building things. So I built programs, I built an institute on complex system, and 2 things I think became clear. The first thing, I was the kind of kid that was interested in everything. So in high school, I couldn't decide between history and physics and Latin. And so broad interest, I, throughout my career, and published mostly in political science, but also in economics, psychology, I have 2 papers in physics journals. So I have a broad set of interests. And the second thing, I had been interested in leadership opportunities. I've been like, president of the my student government in high school. So I tried to find a way to do that at a larger scale. University of Chicago then called me to be the dean of their policy school. I did that for a couple of years, loved it, loved every minute of it. And then they appointed me provost of the University of Chicago, which I did for 3.5 years. And then Vanderbilt called and said, how about, are you interested in the chancellorship? And I was delighted. I learned a lot about the university that I love. And so I'm looking forward now to assuming that new role.
I love a story that seems to be filled with so much joyful curiosity. I think it's consistent with what I see in our students here too. So can you tell us a little bit more about what it was that drew you specifically to Vanderbilt?
Absolutely. So I had been paying attention to Vanderbilt previously. Originally, when I was, a faculty member, I attended here a wonderful conference organized by Mike Vandenberg at the law school a few years ago, and had a wonderful weekend here. And the conference was great, but even better is we went to some great restaurants and then we heard some music. And I saw this incredible 19-year-old guitarist who just blew me away. And I thought, wow, that is fantastic. That was my first direct encounter. And then, of course, I paid attention to what was going on. I looked at the Owen School a little bit, the law school, I mentioned that. And then, the tremendous work that had been going on in political science, all the wonderful people that had converged from various different departments to the political science department. And I, even though I was in a management school, I continued my work in game theory and political science. So I've always paid attention to that. And then I heard about some magnificent things that are going on at the university. I heard about Opportunity Vanderbilt. I've heard about the residential colleges. I've seen the transformation of undergraduate education. And then only a good half a year ago, I little visit to Vanderbilt and learned about the spin-off of the medical center and how that was done, and was super impressed by the thoughtfulness of how this was done. And the difficulty and complexity of this is just unbelievable. But what I didn't know, and that I learned during the selection process, was the culture. And very quickly, it became clear that this culture of collaboration, the culture of being cooperative, respectful, working together. Everybody talked about that, but I could feel it in my interactions. And I could feel it in the very first interaction I had with a small, kind of subcommittee of the search committee. And it has continued. It continued with every conversation. And now that I'm finally have the chance to talk to faculty and leaders in the university, I see it everywhere. And it really was on display in our response to COVID-19. All too often, I think you have universities are very siloed and very territorial, and I haven't seen that. And I think that it's that culture that enables you to do things that otherwise you couldn't do, because it's much easier to work across disciplinary boundaries. The trans-institutional project is one example of that, but I think it goes even further than that. There's an openness to connect across different fields. And Katherine, as you pointed out, that is on a personal level always something I've loved. It's like one of the wonderful joys of being a provost, and I hope so as a chancellor as well, is that you just see all these different activities and you can connect with this richness of academic endeavor in a whole variety of different ways. But you have to create an environment where faculty can thrive, and building on that culture, I think, is extremely promising direction for Vanderbilt. So I'm delighted about that. Every interaction that I've had has just reinforced it for me, and I can't wait to get started.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the key accomplishments that you've had professionally before you arrived here and the takeaways? You've been in a number of different institutions, but obviously there are some unique qualities to Vanderbilt that you're also addressing in our academic culture here. What are the takeaways that you think are most relevant to us from the accomplishments you've had elsewhere?
So the first thing that I would note is that this is my fourth university now that I'm affiliated with as a kind of post-PhD. If I add the PhD, 5 different ones. And everyone is different. Everyone is different. They all share a common commitment to research and education, but how they do it, it's very different. And the biggest differences are in the culture. So just to give you one example, I loved my time at Stanford. I moved after 3 years for personal reasons, but was, tempted to go back twice in my career. But Stanford is a very different place than Northwestern, and it's a very different place from Chicago. They're all great in their own way, but they have a kind of sense of their own identity. And understanding that deeply is really important. It's really important to understand. It's like, what is it that you believe in and what distinguishes you from other great universities? So the cultural differences are very important. That's why I was so impressed by this culture of collaboration, because it's not typical, it's not common, it's something that is very unique to the Vanderbilt culture, and we need to build on that. Accomplishments. So what motivates me to go into higher education is, we talked about that a little bit, but in terms of the leadership role, is I'd like to have an impact. So I'm not so good in a kind of, caretaker stewardship role. So if people put on my tombstone, he didn't sink the ship, that's not me. So I'd like to go to places where I see potential and where I can help people to realize that potential. Working together with the faculty, working together with the staff, working together with the students. So at the Harris School, that's what attracted me to that. The Harris School, it was a great, had been a young school, had some, excellent faculty, but my sense was had never fully realized its potential as a policy school. And so my goal was to do that, to help them do that, to realize that potential. That meant many different things. That meant hiring great faculty, which we did. And we brought faculty there that, previously were thought to be beyond the reach of the Harris School. We built new programs. We raised a lot of money. We built a new building that the Harris School desperately needed. So I think there was a transformation of the Harris School that was rooted in what is it? What's it all about? And in this particular case, it was in one line. It was educating policy leaders that put evidence first. That was what the Harris School was all about. It was a very quantitative, very rigorous approach to public policy. At the provost level, it's very different. At the provost level, and this varies a little bit from university to university, the provost role at Chicago is really central because you, in some sense, have responsibility for the day-to-day operation of the academic enterprise, but you also oversee the budget. So that's not so common. So it's the kind of chief academic officer role, and you oversee the budget at the same time. That is a role with a lot of responsibility. I was brought in to fix the budget, and I think that was very clear. There were real challenges there. So together with my team, we restructured the entire budgetary process from scratch. It made a big difference and really helped with the financial performance of the university. But we also continued to invest in programmatic efforts. Particularly, we transformed the computer science department, continued to invest all across the university, but with a particular emphasis in molecular engineering. Continued the transformation of the college and undergraduate side. So many programmatic activities. And then the last thing that I did is that I was involved with my last big project was the transformation and redesign of funding for PhD students, particularly in the humanities and social sciences. That's a very complicated area. And we put a whole new model together of how we thought about funding there. It's a different way to do PhD funding. And that took a lot of work, a lot of discussions with the deans, a lot of discussions with the vice provost. So I was almost done with it when I decided to step down as provost, but I think my successor is gonna, kind of sail that ship safely into the harbor, and then that last part of my work at Chicago will come to a happy ending.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like many of us here at Vanderbilt, you've had an overlap between scholarship and practice, and you're enacting the scholarship that you focus on. So, as somebody whose scholarship focuses on leadership, what are the highlights or areas from leadership that you think offer us lessons right now in higher education?
So there are three things that I've engaged in throughout my career. The first one is the core work in kind of quantitative oriented political science. I've always been doing that. The second thing were been a whole bunch of projects that I got interested in, as I said before, from psychology to physics. And the third piece really came out of my work in the business school, which started out with crisis management. So I become very interested in that. It started really with Y2K, the crisis that didn't happen. We've all forgotten that by now. And then, of course, after that, we had the collapse of Enron and 9/11, and so that brought the need to think about crisis management into sharp relief. So I've developed curricula on that. I've done research on that. Quite a bit of research now. I just had a book coming out, last fall, which is a very technical book that will have 50 enthusiastic readers, I'm sure. but I'm very proud of what we did there. But there, of course, as you say, Katherine, there's a practical piece to this as well. And so the lessons that came out of the scholarship, I try to apply in my own life as a leader. And I'm paying a lot of attention also to just learning, from other examples. And right now, I take examples from everywhere. I take examples from academic leaders. I take examples from political leaders, business leaders, people from the world of sports, NGOs, social movements. And right now, I'm particularly driven to really revisit the leadership lessons than you learn from people that were leading during a time of extreme challenges. Second World War, Civil War. So you naturally gravitate to people like Lincoln, like Churchill. There are a couple of other examples like that. But I think what you learn from that is, and this is, I think, is very important as we're thinking about this crisis, is you learn from that is that on the one hand, you have to deal with the challenges that you're facing right now. And that has to do safety of students and faculty. How do you enable research and teaching in this challenging environment? That's the thing that that has to capture your attention right now. But I had a conversation with a CEO a few years ago who was in charge of one of the large financial institutions during the 2007-2008 financial crisis. And what he told me, really stuck with me, is he said, in his suit pocket, John has a suit, but I just have to pretend I have one right now. It's like, he said he had in his left pocket, he had a yellow notepad, a little card, an index card, which had the 10 things he had to do today to make sure that the company is still around tomorrow. That's the urgency. That's what you have to, that's the crisis. But in his right pocket, he had another index card where he would write down the things that he wanted to focus on so that when we get through this, we could get through this stronger. And I'm trying very hard to make sure that I keep thinking about this every day. Yes, we need to deal with the specific challenges of today, but I want us to be very mindful and intentional about what do we do now so that we can get through this stronger. And I am very confident that we can, but we have to think about this and exactly what this looks like. Of course, it's not totally clear yet, but there are aspects, I think, that are very promising, and that there are many wonderful things that are happening at the university, and we just have to make sure that we keep this in mind as we're dealing with the specific challenges that are urgent and that are top of mind for us. So I'm trying very hard to do this. The great thing is, of course, I'm working closely with Vice Chancellor, with Interim Chancellor and Provost Susan Venti. And so they are great on dealing with so many of the operational issues that need to be addressed. I'm involved with that, but that is in such good hands, is that it allows me to keep thinking about the horizon a little bit and ask ourselves, how do we get through this a stronger Vanderbilt than we are now?
And I appreciate the deep dive into your personal work and the support you're seeing already among our other administrators. But we're faculty. We like to cut ourselves. So can you tell a little bit more about how you imagine the opportunities for faculty here to be a part in what happens next in the life of the university? Where are we in your horizon setting for Vanderbilt's success?
So what I'm doing right now is I've started to have extensive conversations on that. So I think I've talked maybe to like 30 faculty at this point. My goal is to talk to a lot more, and that will continue over the next few weeks. And I'm like super impressed with what I'm seeing and the work that's going on. And also I think, the kind of, as I said before, it expresses a particular pride in the place, an affection for the place, and a particular culture. What I would like to see on the faculty side, and this comes back to my little metaphor of the two index cards, is that I know how difficult this is right now and how challenging this is, and but I'd like you to continue to think big and to think about opportunities and don't put the ideas aside. Doesn't mean we can act on them right away, but all the great ideas for universities come from the faculty. That's where the great ideas come from. And I encourage you to take this as a moment, as a pivotal moment, if you will, a turning point for Vanderbilt, where we can build an even greater Vanderbilt. But the only way this is going to work is that if the faculty individually, as departments, as groups, are engaged in that process. And so I will do that. I will facilitate that. I'll have conversations. But at the end of the day, it's the work of the faculty that is at the core of driving the academic mission of the university. So I encourage you to be ambitious, not to be depressed by the current situation, but to think about what are the types of things that we should do, that we can do, and how do we advance the mission of Vanderbilt as we're moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see some of those opportunities and challenges here? I mean, you're presenting both sort of near-term concerns for us to think about and a long-term horizon setting. What are the practical opportunities and challenges we need to be prepared for?
I think that opportunity and challenge, I think, is exactly the right way to think about it. Is that we're having as I said before, biggest challenge in the history of the university, arguably. But every crisis has an opportunity. So what does that mean? Let me take just one example of this. The financial impact of COVID-19 on universities is profound and deep. Every revenue category that you can imagine has been negatively affected by the pandemic. We will have, obviously, the endowment is going down. There's philanthropy usually goes down during a recession. We have to spend more on financial aid because financial aid is driven by wealth, family wealth. That's taking a hit. When the labs are not open, it's more difficult to be able to utilize grants. Literally everything that we do has been negatively affected by this. Having said that, the university is fortunate to be in a better financial situation than their competitor. Let me be clear about that. That is not something that fell from the sky, and we were lucky. This is the legacy of tremendously diligent, smart, and careful work that Chancellor Emeritus Zeppers, Provost Venti, and Interim Chancellor Venti, and the CFO, and the whole financial staff did over the last few years. But what does that mean? That means is that everyone will suffer, but we will suffer less. That's the situation. So just to give an example of this, I know we had to take some painful cuts, and we had to make some financial sacrifices. But I encourage everyone to have a look what's happening in other universities where we have extensive layoffs, furloughs. Many leading universities, our peers, our aspirational peers, have suspended their benefit contributions, retirement benefits. So this is a serious situation. Having said that, we have to do some tough things, and we may have to do more tough things. That's possible, depending on how things develop. But we are in a position that is relatively speaking stronger than our competitors. So than our peer universities. So the question is, what do we do with that? And then more specifically, what are we taking from this experience? Every one of us had to now teach online. What does that mean? I think one thing it means, I have 2 college-age kids at home, is they can't wait to get back. So it actually reinforced the value and the commitment to residential education that we've always had. But it also, opened up, I think, potential new opportunities in other areas. Maybe, we're going to do something maybe for the undergraduates, but in areas of professional education, in areas of continuing education. Faculty now have had the experience of what it's like to teach online, even those that have never tried it before. And I think some of them may say, hey, it's kind of interesting, that's fun, and we can expand our reach. We can have more of an impact if we think about new ideas along the side. So what I would encourage people is to take this experience, see what we've learned from that, see how we can turn this into opportunity, and whether that is with respect to the specific areas that we're interested in, or the bigger issues of higher education that we're dealing with, such as technology, such as how do we think about the issues of inequities that we just started our conversation with Katherine. So what do we do with it? How do we take this moment, this pivotal moment, and turn it into a force for good?
Mhm.
That's the thing. And everyone has to do this in their own area. I mean, if you work at Peabody, you may be asking yourself, how can I have more of an impact in order to improve, schools, particularly underprivileged communities? If you work in engineering, there may be new opportunities there. If you're working at own, you may ask yourself, how can I use, online teaching to have more of an impact with respect to all the people that may look for new certification or new training as part of the expected disruption that we see in the workforce. So I would use that. I would encourage people to use this as an opportunity to think about new ideas, how their work can have an even bigger impact as we're moving forward.
And you mentioned a concern that I want to come back to because it's come up in so many of the questions that were addressed before we began today. I think, as you can expect, a number of the faculty raised questions about diversity and inclusion here. To pull together a few of those questions into one, can you talk about what steps you envision making here at Vanderbilt to engage our campus in support of a different type of commitment to racial equity, both on campus as a national university and also locally here in the streets of Nashville? For example, how do you imagine ensuring that we both hire and support Black faculty who are coming to the university?
Yeah, so hugely important issue. And I think that the goal that we have on having a more diverse student body, bringing African-American students and faculty to campus, and a faculty body is crucial, is important, and we need to double down on that. Where things get complicated is exactly how do you make that work?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been at this now for 5 years, and I've learned in this process is that getting this just right requires careful thought and the willingness to try things out, learn what works and what doesn't work, and then to pivot. I want to just give you one example. I'll give you an example on the student side and then an example on the faculty side. Mm-hmm. On the student side, during my time as provost, we were really struggling to bring Hispanic students, to increase to be able to bring Hispanic students to campus, to have them, and we didn't know why. We were working with the student, we were working with the counselors. We did the same thing that had worked very well with African-American students, so we tried that. But it turned out is that the challenges were different. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges is that in many Hispanic communities, the families play a very important role in the decision making, much more than in other communities. So what we did is we brought then the students and their family on campus for 2 weeks and translated all admissions materials into Spanish, not for the kids, but for the parents, mm-hmm. so that they could feel comfortable that their son or daughter would feel at home and feel a sense of belonging at the University of Chicago. Made an enormous difference. There's a whole program around that just focused on Hispanic students. We did this with African-American students. The other challenge was very different. The other challenge was how do you overcome the barriers, not the financial barriers, but how do you overcome the barriers that students that have nobody in their family that went to college, that have no context for that they imagine that they could fit to a place like Vanderbilt. How do you do this? So we went into the schools, we worked with the schools, we helped the students with application processes for any great universities, whether they would go to University of Chicago or somebody else. So you have to work it, you have to be in it. And what works in one context and one university doesn't work in the other one. Faculty, hard problem. Here's the problem. The problem is that how do you attract African-American faculty? Or my problem at the Harrow School were women faculty. Mm-hmm. Had a real problem with gender, with being able to get women faculty members to the school. Now, in some cases, that's a problem of bias. No doubt about that. There were some cases, but in other cases, it's a completely different problem. So, for example, it is extremely difficult to hire African-American economists. Very hard. Why is that? Not because you don't want to, but because a place like Vanderbilt in the business school or in the economics department, they would hire junior faculty from the top 10 economics departments. There's not a single African American that's graduated from the top 10 economics department in the last 10 years. So they're the solution. They're the solution is how do you create a pipeline so that students, African American students or Hispanic students, see themselves as joining the academy, as pursuing a PhD in a particular area. Huge problem in economics, huge problem in mathematics, huge problem in physics. And I am so proud of the program that we have in astrophysics here that is working on a bridging program to make sure that we diversify not just the faculty, but the doctoral programs. Because if we're not diversifying the doctoral programs, we're not going to diversify the faculty. So one of the things I did as provost was to work together with other peer institutions, is to work on that, so that we're not all stuck in a situation where we just did not have enough African American students in the doctoral programs. That's a problem. No, totally different problem in English, totally different problem in anthropology, totally different problem in sociology. So the challenges are well, these are difficult challenges. We need to work through that, and very often what you think at first is a good idea may not work out. So I'm totally committed to that, but I need to understand more what the specific challenges at Vanderbilt are, what are the obstacles, and then how do we overcome them, knowing full well that maybe the first idea won't catch, and we're going to try a bunch of different things until we make progress.
As I'm sure you can imagine, a number of the questions that we've had come through also relate to the university's response to the coronavirus,
Yes.
and particularly into its influence on our teaching. So can you talk about how you intend to involve faculty in the pedagogical opportunities that exist for us in our classes, the challenges that we know are going to be part of there, particularly in terms of balancing face-to-face or an online or hybrid model, in what we know are some uncertainties, and also in collaboration with our colleagues at VUMC and the concerns that they're raising for us, and specifically when we may have more clarity on what we're going to do next.
Great question. So the first thing I should say is that we're pretty much ready with a plan for returning to campus. And this was done, there was, as I said before, extremely hard and diligent work with faculty input, with discussions on you mentioned, the medical center, the medical school. So this has been informed by ongoing working groups, those that looked at the academic side, that looked at the administrative side, things like housing and classroom capacities and a residence hall, and then the public safety side. So it was done in a collaborative spirit and using the absolutely best information available, including on the public health side. So we will announce that next week. Interim Chancellor and Provost Venti will send out specific details on the faculty side. I'm very comfortable with the process that we have, but it is a blueprint. So what that means is that it will put certain parameters in place, a calendar and things like that, many aspects related to student life. But then how to make this come alive, and how do you deal, Catherine, with the type of challenges that you're talking about? There will be ongoing work with the faculty over the summer. I think what we're gonna see is that within that overall structure, there will also be room for experimentation. There will be room for making something that works for a particular pedagogy, and so this will be the work over the summer, is to think this through carefully and to make sure that we are ending up at a place where the faculty feels comfortable, and where they have a sense that we're going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And then another question that came up in a number of spaces combined into one is some of the messaging that's coming out of the university seems to indicate that we're in a little bit of a stronger economic position than some of our peer institutions. Thought ahead differently about the potential crisis. But we also see very real budget cuts
Yes.
across the colleges within our departments, significantly impacting the actual people that we work with every day.
Yes.
What's your approach to being able to manage the costs and the financial limitations while still taking account for what's an important culture of care for the individuals here?
No, absolutely. So I think that so the way I just want to emphasize what I said before. Everybody will suffer, but we will suffer less. That's the reality. So we had to take drastic action in March and April because the impact was profound and it affected us in many, as I said before, literally in every category, in every revenue category, every financial category that you can imagine. And the impact was profound. The impact on other universities was even deeper, so they had to do more. So there were a bunch of things that we were able to avoid, but that doesn't mean that we didn't have to cut, and it doesn't mean that these cuts were not painful. And so what we tried to do, and I think we accomplished to some extent, I don't want to minimize the difficulties here, but we tried very hard, is to make sure that this was done in a way that you called it, Katherine, a culture of caring, that we would put the people that were affected front and center, and that we feel as good as we possibly can about how we handle this. I think people need, whenever you have to do tough things like that, you have to ask yourself, how do you do it in the most caring fashion possible? And how do you make sure that people are treated as well as you possibly can? Now, did we always accomplish that? Was that always the case? I don't want to say that. But I think overall, again, please keep in mind what's happening at other places at the same time. I think we got a long way in that, and it required hard work and careful work. And I think the team did this extremely well given the circumstances. Having said that, we also, things have brightened a little bit for now. So that opens up new opportunities. We have to be careful not to be overconfident either, because as I said before, there is gonna be tremendous uncertainty moving forward, and I know how difficult this is to deal with this uncertainty. We all want to know what's it gonna be like in October or November, and the answer is we don't know. We don't know, and anybody that tells me is lying to you. That tells you otherwise is lying to you. So what that means for us is we're gonna have plans. We're going to have scenarios. We have contingency plans that allow us to have a lot of flexibility. And they will always be driven by two concerns. One is the health and safety of our faculty, our staff, and our students. And number two, our mission. That's what's going to drive our decision-making on that. And I feel good on where we are, but everybody needs to be clear. Is now mentioned Churchill before, I'm going to mention him now. This is not the end of the beginning. This is perhaps No, I messed it up. This is not the beginning of the end. This is perhaps the end of the beginning. So, and we need to keep that in mind. So, I wish we could remove the uncertainty, but we can't.
A number of the questions that have come through in the live chat today, you've touched on in different spaces, but one that did not, and that I think also probably reflects my monopolizing of the faculty voice today. We have a question about, you had mentioned wanting to meet, you've met with about 30 faculty members individually so far, but what are your plans for being able to meet with smaller groups of faculty as you're here more permanently in small group settings, so that some of the things that are more uniquely relevant to faculty on the ground level can be addressed?
So I'd love to do that. My plan was to do that in person. Now, of course, that's all out of the window. At this point, I did this, with Zoom meetings. And I think I'd love to continue to do that. There's a little bit of a structure to that because I wanted to talk to the deans and then department chairs. And then as we have conversation with the faculty at large, these small group interactions, I find them extremely useful. So we just have to kind of plan that and think about that, how we'll do that. I think it's be a great thing to do this over the summer. And, it just needs to be organized and put together. And then we'll have to see whether we do it in this format or whether at that point we'll be able to do it in person as well.
Sure. I'm looking at the clock as well, and know we are crushed up against our 1 hour time. Before we close, is there anything else that you wanted to address before we wrap up today?
Well, Catherine, I very much, first of all, thank you for doing this. I joined the conversation, and thank you all for joining today. It's would be the first one of many, I hope. And I just want to end with thanking you for what you've done over the last month. These were very difficult times, and the faculty has stepped up to address those challenges. We're gonna do this as we're moving forward in a spirit that expresses and embodies the core values that make Vanderbilt special, in a sense of collaboration and with a one Vanderbilt focus. I know that this will be difficult over the next few weeks and months, but I'm confident that if we work together on that, and if we do this in a way that is consistent with who we are, we will get through this stronger, and we will write the next chapter in Vanderbilt's illustrious history. I look forward to that. I can't wait to get going, and thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be able to have the conversation with you. This is, I'll mangle your own quote, the end of the beginning of more conversations with faculty. So I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much, and passing it back to John before we close out.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel and Catherine, for a very engaging conversation. And as we wrap up today, I want to remind everyone that a recording of today's conversation will be available on the Chancellor's Transition website. And I'm sure you can look forward to hearing much more from our incoming Chancellor in the lead up to July 1st. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and please be safe.
Thank you.